Congressman Allred, thank you for joining us. Always appreciate you sitting down with us. You are trying to accomplish something that Democrats have been dreaming about for decades, to put a Democrat back in a statewide elected office in Texas. Why is 2024, of all years, the year that is going to happen?
Well, I understand why you describe it that way. I honestly don't see it that way, though. I see it as that we've had for 12 years a senator who's been largely uninterested in representing us, and that we don't have to have 6 more years of that. And you know, I'm a Texan first. I'm a 4th-generation Texan. I was born and raised in Dallas. Went to school at Baylor. I know that's always very popular here in Austin. And I played in the NFL, and I've served in Congress in a way that shows it's possible to bring folks together. And so, to me, the choice for us isn't whether or not about our past and past elections. This is about the next 6 years for Texas, and who can lead us into the future, and who can make sure that we bring us together.
You just got off a big campaign swing through the Rio Grande Valley. Very interesting area politically nowadays, but I think there is a tendency of people who are not from that region to characterize it in a single simple issue, which is immigration and border policy, right?
That's right.
But it's a lot more complicated than that. Tell me what you're hearing from people when you're campaigning down there, and what your message is to secure an area that has been trending more Republican.
Well, I'm so glad you said it that way, because my family's from the Valley. My grandfather was a customs officer in Brownsville. It's where my mom and aunt were born and raised. I spent a lot of my childhood there. And you're absolutely right. Listen, we have to have a secure border. That's an incredibly important thing that we have to do. But it's also true that folks in the Valley are worried about the economy. They're worried about their ability to retire with dignity. They know that Ted Cruz has an entire career really attacked Medicare and Social Security. I visited a hospital there that is really the only social safety net hospital in one of the regions. And there's so much disparity in terms of access to care. And we have such a high uninsured rate. And we also have really high, some of these really chronic issues like diabetes, hypertension in the Valley, that healthcare is incredibly important. We have the highest uninsured rate in the country. It's even higher, though, in the Valley than it is, for example, in Dallas County and in Travis County. And so we have to address this. We have to have leaders who want to address it, not just who want to go down to the Valley and treat it like they're there for a photo shoot. That's not enough. You have to help solve the problems, not just point them out.
Yeah, now you have been down there to campaign on border issues as well, as the senator certainly has. Immigration and border security really is his top issue other than the economy. I want to ask you specifically about an ad that he's been running against you, an attack ad focused on border policy, where he quotes you in saying, "If they build that racist wall, my generation is the one that will tear it down." Do you still believe that the border wall is racist, and would you support legislation that provides funding to construct more of it?
Well, they were talking, that's a comment taken out of context, really. But listen, border security, as I've always said, is about more than physical barriers, although physical barriers are an important part of it, and I have voted to fund them, and that is something we have to have. But when we talk about border security, it's about resources, personnel, and technology. And that's what we had in the Senate bill that Ted Cruz doesn't want to talk about, that he took down this year. This was a Senate bill for $20 billion for border security, for 1,500 new Border Patrol agents, 100 new immigration judges, over 1,000 administrative personnel to help us deal with the backlog in terms of the asylum situation we're dealing with, money for technology to stop fentanyl coming across our border, money actually for the communities along the border that have been impacted by the surge of migrants. So places like Brownsville, where my family's from, would have received funding from this. This is a common sense bill that was bipartisan, and Ted Cruz said no to it because he wants to have the issue to run on in November. He wants to talk about a problem, but never wants to solve it. And so this is what I'm talking about, that there's a fundamental difference here. I've been the most bipartisan Texan in Congress. I've always focused on what can we get done. I don't set unrealistic goals, and I'm very direct with the folks who I represent. I want to make sure that they know this is what we can do, this is what I'm working on getting done. And to do that, you have to work in a bipartisan way. Ted Cruz never will. I will.
So Cruz has been, I guess, moderating himself, you could say, during this campaign. He has a whole arm of his campaign called Democrats for Cruz, trying to beef up his bipartisan credentials. Meanwhile, he points to your record that he says is not bipartisan at all. Why are you the more effective operator with both sides of the aisle? But kind of address what he's been saying about you.
Well, listen. What Ted Cruz is telling folks is don't believe your lying eyes. right? Believe me, right? I've been the most extreme senator for 12 years, but in an election year, now I'm bipartisan, right? And I have a record of doing this when I'm not running for office. I've been awarded this. This is not my determination. It was an independent group that said that I was the most bipartisan Texan in Congress. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, not exactly a left-wing group, endorsed me twice and gave me an award saying that for my bipartisan work, right? So this is something that is very clear. You can check records, but what I would say though is that it shows up when you talk about the big things that help. On the CHIPS and Science Act, for example, which is, you see the Samsung fab that's being built here outside of Austin, receiving billions of dollars from the CHIPS and Science Act. UT, and the UT system receiving funding to train up the workforce to work in these things. John Cornyn in the Senate helped push it through in a bipartisan way. I in the House helped push it through in a bipartisan way. Ted Cruz voted against it. Right? It shows up in these big things where we're trying to actually deliver. The infrastructure bill, bringing $35 billion to our state. Mitch McConnell was voting for it in the Senate. I was voting for it in the House. Ted Cruz is voting against it. So this is not about rhetoric. You can actually check this. And Texans should, because we know who Ted Cruz is. He only cares about himself, and he's been an extremist for over a decade. I've been the most bipartisan Texan.
And meanwhile, you mentioned the Chamber of Commerce. They just endorsed Cruz.
Sure.
They said that he has been a champion of pro-growth policies, and that's really the thesis of his campaign. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. The Texas economy is good. Don't change anything. Why are you, as a Democrat, the better choice if somebody is just voting purely economically?
Well, let's talk about being pro-growth, because when you have billions of dollars of investment coming to our state that you have voted against, with the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, these are bipartisan efforts, and you voted against that, and that's creating tens of thousands of jobs in our state. You are a free rider in the system. You're not responsible for what's happening around you. So if you want to take credit for the Texas economy and not vote for the things that are helping it be strong, then that's not how it works, right? You can't say, I'm voting no, but I'm going to take the dough, okay? It takes real folks like me and John Cornyn, to his credit, who are rolling up our sleeves and actually trying to find the smart policy that will put us on this stronger footing. And then when Ted Cruz does this and then comes out and says, no, I'm responsible for all this, folks should know what he's doing, right? And should call it for the lie that it is.
Yeah. We were talking to John Cornyn at a presser the other day, and somebody asked about the compliments that you've been giving him, and he said, well, it's hard to say something mean about somebody who's saying nice things about you. So maybe that's an ally you'll have in the Senate there too.
Yeah.
I don't know if he wants me to say that, but let's talk. You have made a point that this campaign is not nationalized. You're focusing on Texas.
Yeah.
But in the minds of voters, this is the presidential year, and they're going to be viewing everything through Harris and Trump, right? You may understandably have distanced yourself a little bit from the Biden administration, trying to focus on your own race. But when somebody wonders what your relationship is with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, what do you tell them? Are you supportive? Or I guess the question is, how do you differentiate yourself from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
Yeah. Well, listen, I think when you play football and you come from the background I did, I'm just not a very partisan person. And so I come at most ideas based on whether I think it's good for the district that I represent and for our state and for the country. Now I want to do it for the entire state. And that's how you have the kind of bipartisan record that I have, where you're not just following the party line, you're actually actively trying to find places that you agree. But I'm going to be a Texan first in the Senate. I always have been, I always will be. And so that'll mean that we'll have differences of opinion on energy policy, for example. I've stood up at times to the Biden administration on that, particularly when it came to their LNG pause. On the border, I've been very critical previously of what we were doing there and the lack of action, while also saying it requires congressional action as well. And I'm going to also always look out for us, and that's going to be my prism, how I see things through. The opposite is true of Ted Cruz, though. If you want to talk about somebody who is just a national, sees everything through a national lens and not through Texas lens first, that's how, when this important legislation comes up and it's going to help Texas more than other states, you can vote against it, because you're really worried only about your election or the partisan outcome or what it's going to do, how it's going to get you attention or not get you attention. And so this is a very clear decision for Texans to make. Who can serve us for the next 6 years? Ted Cruz, who's shown us for 12 years exactly who he is? Or should we have some fresh ideas and new leadership and take us in a different direction and back together?
I imagine it's a very difficult position to be in, though, when the message is bipartisanship and working with everybody. That builds a really big tent, but a big tent is difficult to keep standing, right? When you have Liz Cheney and AOC in your corner, right? How do you keep everybody happy inevitably there's going to be differences of opinion in that camp.
Yeah.
Are you making promises to people that maybe you can't keep because you got to vote one way or another when it comes to policy?
This is important to talk about because the coalition that we're building here in Texas is one that I think believes in the Constitution, believes in the rule of law, believes in the fundamental goodness of the American people, of us as Texans, and thinks that we're going to have some disagreements along the way, but our values are the most important thing. And Liz Cheney's a patriot, and I'm proud to have her support. And she's supporting me because Ted Cruz was one of the architects of the attempt to overthrow the last presidential election. And that is such a mark on him, and such a dangerous action that for the first time in our 250-year history, we didn't have a peaceful transfer of power. And it wasn't just one person responsible for it. It was also Ted Cruz in the United States Senate helping to lead the charge to overturn an American presidential election. And then in the aftermath, lying about what happened, even though those police officers who died and were injured that day and who saved his life, to say that that wasn't terrorism, what happened that day, that wasn't domestic terrorism, that to try and undermine what happened that day and to try and make it so that folks don't understand what really happened on the 6th, that's the coalition that we're building here. And I want every Texan who believes in our Constitution, every Texan who thinks that, listen, we might have some disagreements, but our system is a strong one, and we have to go forward together to know that they're welcome in our campaign and that I'll be their senator when I'm in the Senate.
It's bigger than one policy issue or specifics. It's a grander kind of.
Well, this is not a normal election. It's not a normal election, and I think folks should know that. For the first time in our history, in the last presidential election,
what makes this so unique?
Well, we didn't have a peaceful transfer of power. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. A lot of countries have elections. Venezuela just had an election. They didn't have a transfer of power, even though the opponent won. Vladimir Putin has elections in Russia. The election itself is not the peak of your democracy. The peak of your democracy is when the results of that election are respected and verified, and then the power is transferred from the most powerful person in the country to someone else. That's what George Washington gave us when he stepped away from power, was showing us that this is how we're going to do this here. That we're going to have a system that's more important than any one person. Ted Cruz doesn't understand that. I do.
Last question here, looking forward to the rest of your campaign. Senator Cruz has accused you of running what he says is a basement campaign. And frankly, that is not a criticism that only comes from him, but has come from Democrats as well. You've increased your on-the-ground campaigning recently, but can you elaborate more on what your strategy is and maybe comfort some Democrats who are a little antsy that they want to see you a little bit more?
Listen, we've had 50 stops in 22 cities in the last month. So Ted Cruz, he's not out and doing what I'm doing. I know that. And also, Ted Cruz wants to talk about process because he doesn't want to talk about the results of what he's been doing. What he's been doing is responsible for this abortion ban that we have here in the state. He doesn't want to talk about that. So when reporters contact him about it, his campaign says no. He doesn't want to talk about it because it's having horrific consequences here. So that's why you keep seeing him talking about process stuff. Well, what about how the policy that you've put in place, that you've inflicted upon Texas women here in the state, taking away a fundamental right that's resulting in folks like my friends Amanda and Josh Zorowski having the horrific experience that they had here in Austin, where a miscarriage that should have been treated quickly became something that may lead to them never being able to welcome their own child. And now she has to go tell her story around the state and around the country to make sure this doesn't happen to future Texas women. This is what Ted Cruz is responsible for. So if he wants to talk about process, that's fine. I'll talk about what's happening here in Texas and how I'm going to lead us in a different direction.
When's the last time you've been in a room with Cruz?
Oh, maybe a year ago, yeah. Well, actually, no. We've had several joint sessions of different things, so I guess that, yeah.
Have you ever worked together closely? I mean, would you say that you know him well personally?
No, and in fact, and John Cornyn and I do have a good relationship, and we have met and worked on things, and I think that's an important distinction because this is it's a two-way street, and Ted Cruz has been and is known in Washington as what we call a hyper-partisan. There are folks who are going to do what their party wants, then there are others who are only interested in just things either about themselves or driving division. That's why his colleagues mock him. That's why Lindsey Graham, well, I want to go into it, but anyway, so you can look up the jokes that they've made about him. That's why he's such a disliked member of the United States Senate, is because of the way he's behaved.
Well, do you hope you can get this in a room with him together again and debate this head to head?
Yeah, we'll have a debate, and I look forward to it. So
we're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Congressman, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you. Yeah.